even let leave when he was not able to overcome. In other words, he treated the people as people. Even though he was conquering them, he treated them as people, not as objects to be controlled. So it's a difference. Even in war, doesn't mean that we're not going to have conflicts. Just because we have a heart of peace doesn't mean that life's going to be just totally simple. You know, Jesus tells us that. When our heart is, it's how we respond if we have a heart of peace. So we're dealing with conflict right now within our church. And how we deal with that conflict is, when I say our church, I'm talking about the United Methodist Church, not St. Paul's, but maybe St. Paul's too. We may be a microcosm of our United Methodist Church. Some of us are on both sides of this issue. So this behooves us to try to understand how we can have this heart at peace so that we can actually be open to others. One of the ways, probably not the only way, but one of the ways that our heart hardens and becomes at war with others is that we betray ourselves. He tells a story of one of the leaders, the writers of the book, tells the story of Yusuf is a Muslim young boy early in. He's begging on the streets of Jerusalem. He's begging alongside a blind Jewish man, Mordecai. And one day, they've never spoken to each other. They've been side by side for several years, but never spoken to each other. And one day, Mordecai stumbles and drops his coin purse, and the coins spill all over the ground. And Yusuf immediately turns his back and walks away. Now, Yusuf's first desire when this happens is to help. He knew that he needed to help Mordecai pick up his coins. But he betrayed himself, turned away, and left. So he made a choice to betray himself, and when he did that, all of a sudden he began to think about, Mordecai was blind, he shouldn't have been there anyway. This was the Arab part of Jerusalem, and he shouldn't have been begging in my territory. And because Yusuf's father had been killed by an Israeli raid, all of a sudden all the Jews began to be a problem. And he began to see Mordecai and the Jews as being all against him. They shouldn't have been there. Mordecai shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have had to beg. It's their fault. It's their fault. He begins to see himself as being a victim. He begins to see himself as being put down. Begins to see himself that he deserves better. And all of this, as he continues to have those thoughts, his feelings are feelings of betrayal, feelings of hurt, feelings of victimization, all of those things. And whose fault is it? It's Mordecai's fault. it's the Jewish people's fault. It's the Israelis' fault. See, these are all internal thoughts that Yusuf is having. But all of these internal thoughts then help him have a heart at war. He begins to see others, not only the Israelis, but he begins to see basically all of those, even some of his family members, and even people that he thinks ought to do more about Arab causes. He begins to see them in the same light. He begins to objectify them. Now, if he had made a choice to do what his sense or desire was, if he had said, okay, I'm going to help Mordecai, then his heart would still be at peace. He wouldn't have been having all of these other thoughts. How many times does that happen to us? We know we need to call somebody. We know we need to help somebody out. And either we get distracted or too busy. There's probably 1,001 reasons why we don't do what we know we need to do. But that all causes us to begin to have that heart at war. It's not anybody else's fault. It's what we have done within ourselves that helps us to have this heart at war. Now, I'm trying to, in an hour and a half, to cover a book that probably we should study for 8 weeks, but, and so, are there questions? I know I'm going fast and I'm just hitting the high points. Any questions? You're too kind. Who's calling? Well, then this is called the collusion diagram. What happens is, let's say something happens at work. We see our coworker do something. Maybe we see them take time off, leave early, not do their job quite completely. Then all of a sudden, we see that, and we begin to say, he or she didn't live up to their obligations. I'm better than they are. Maybe I can leave early, not do my job. Maybe I can do this. So you see, then we move into how we respond, and maybe even a better thing is when our wife asks us to pick up our dirty socks off the floor. And we respond, I need to get going. I need to be gone. And then all of a sudden, we get into this loop. We decide, well, I'll pick up my socks if you'll clean up after breakfast, or if you'll clean up after dinner, or, And then we get into this vicious circle. One of us does one thing, we see it, then we do something else, they see it, and next thing you know, we're in one of these circles where, and before long, we begin to see that the other one is not a person. The other one is an object standing in our way to happiness, or standing in our way to getting what we want. And then that's not bad enough. What we do is we go out and find allies to take our sides. We call our friend, what my husband did today?
Oh, we don't have to call him, but we just put on Facebook.
Yeah, we put it on Facebook, exactly, right. Now, let me tell you about my wife now, and on it goes, right? It continues to explode. And this all happens because we have a heart at war. Because we don't understand what's going on with the other, or we don't want to take the time to see what's going on. Maybe the husband does need to get out of the house. Maybe he's been late to work and needs to be there for something. Maybe there's a reason why dishes don't get done after the meal. Maybe there's a problem. Maybe there needs to be a dishwasher fixed, or maybe there needs to be a dishwasher. I'm glad we're chuckling because I want us I want us to laugh at this, but I also want us to see the seriousness of it. Because it happens in our conversations with one another. One of the worst things that's going on in America right now is we all want to be right. We want somebody else to be wrong. And when we have a heart at war, we can't even entertain the possibility that maybe I might have something wrong that needs to be corrected. Maybe I can see something a little differently.
Or sometimes my husband and I might get into it, and then we start to realize we're both in the same place. We're just arguing about it, and we both agree.
Yeah. You agree to argue, right?
Apparently so.
But we have learned not to say, I messed up. We've learned not to say, I was wrong. Our society has learned this. Now, if there's any attorneys in the room, I apologize for this, but I, as a business owner, I was an engineer, consulting engineer. If you ever want to be in the litigious business, go in, be an engineer in our society, because as soon as you complete your project, the first person you're going to hear from is an attorney telling you what you did wrong. Somebody's wanting to sue you. But one of the things, of course, we had to have insurance. And one of the things that the insurance companies told us, never admit that you did something wrong. Well, that's the way our whole society has gotten. We don't want to, for legal reasons, we don't want to admit that we do anything wrong. But when we get into that mindset, we are already as a heart at war. Our heart at peace has left us. Because now it's all about protecting ourselves. It's all about being right. Somebody else must have been wrong. I got wrong information. The draftsman didn't draw it right. You know, we can find all the excuses. But we have a tendency, maybe that ally there is the attorney that we hire. But in any case, this is how things accelerate. One of the things that happens is that I know I had to try to do this on a paint program, and so it's a little sloppy. Sorry about that. Wrong button. We start out down here. This is called an influence pyramid. Now, this top section right here is correcting things that have gone wrong. And this is where we spend most of our time, dealing with things that go wrong. Now, if we worked through these other areas of the pyramid, we would help things go right. And this is where we need to spend most of our time. And what we've been talking about is this bottom level of the pyramid, which says we need to get out of the box and obtain a heart of peace. We're going to talk about the box in a little bit, so just hang on to that. I'll get there. This is probably not in the best order, but we'll deal with that later. So we want to have a heart of peace. We want to work on ourselves, and we'll talk about what things we can do to help ourselves get out of the box. The box is something that is caused when we have a heart at war. And so we need to work on that. That's us. That's working on us. Then we need to build relationships with others who have influence. Now, who have influence, that means that if we have, even Paul talks about this. What does Paul say? Paul says, if you have a brother or sister who has sinned, what do? You get somebody else to go with you, and you go and you talk to the brother or sister. You get some help. You develop a relationship. But you build relationships. That's the big thing. You begin to build relationships outside of your character. Not as an ally, not looking for somebody to take your side. You are building a relationship. One thing about best friends is that they'll tell you when you're wrong. If you have a best friend and they're afraid to tell you, then you've got a problem. You know, either you need to change you or get a new friend, one of the two. Best friends are not afraid to tell you when you're wrong. So you need to build relationships. And when you have teenagers, it's a good thing to build relationships with others who have relationships with your teenager or your young person or somebody that has influence with the person that you have contention with. You need to have a relationship with the teachers. You need to have a relationship with the coaches. You need to have a relationship with the other kids that your child. It's all about relationships. Relationships with people who, you know, if you have a relationship with your son's best friend or your daughter's best friend, they have a better chance of communicating maybe with your child than maybe you do, depending upon the situation, of course. So you build relationships with those that may have influence. But the big thing is you build relationships. You work on relationships with others, even others that you don't agree with maybe. Even others that you know are, maybe when it's a child or a teenager, you work on building a relationship with a teenager. When a teenager goes into drugs, when somebody that you love gets connected with the drug community, you've got your work cut out for you, especially if you don't have a relationship with them. Because at that point, no longer are you able to have a relationship with them because you're going to end up having a relationship with the drugs, not with the person. So building a relationship, having, I know most of us in here are grandparents and great-grandparents. So you have, I know you think you're done, but you're not.
There's no
No, they're not. And they're dealing with different issues today than we had to deal with when we were growing up. It's a different world. It's so much the same and so different. But relationships are still key. This is a key element. And when you're trying to correct something, or when there's something that you need to help, one of the things that we have forgotten how to do in our society is listen and learn. I like the idea that we have one mouth and two ears. We ought to be listening twice as much as we ought to be talking. And asking questions. Part of the listening and learning is asking questions. How many of you watch NCIS New Orleans? One of the things that the team leader, what's he always say when they get down and he's sending all the things out? He said, "Go learn things. Go learn things." We need to, part of when we have relationships, it makes it easier to listen and learn. But listening and learning means that we ask questions, that we go search for things. Maybe we go see what the issues are that the other person is dealing with. Maybe we learn why someone is unhappy. Maybe we find out why they're frustrated, why they're scared, why they're fearful, why they're angry. What's making them angry? What are you upset about? Why are you hurting? What can I do? Listening and learning. And then when you actually know something, maybe then you can teach and communicate. But you see, trying to teach and communicate when we don't have the rest of this, one of the laws associated with this pyramid is that if you have a problem at any level, the solution is at one of the levels below. So if you're having a hard time listening and learning, the solution to the problem is down here in building relationships with others, or maybe it's even all the way down here where we have a heart at war towards the person that we're dealing with, and we can't listen. So the idea that if we're having a problem at a certain level, the solution is below it, somewhere here. Always at a level below, or two levels below. If we're up here, if we have a problem that needs to be corrected, we have to do something down here to correct. If we have trouble building relationships with others, probably here's the problem. We don't have a heart at peace. See how that goes? Make sense? So simple, it's crazy, isn't it?
Simple but very hard to do.
Love our neighbor. Yeah, easy to say, hard to do. Yeah. Now, I said I'd talk about boxing. Aren't those pretty stick figures? I said we would get into some boxes. We're going to be talking about this. This is us right here. This is the other person that we're having to deal with, or who's in our sphere of influence. And depending upon how we see ourselves, if we can either see ourselves as better than, or we may see ourselves as I deserve better, or we may see ourselves as worse than this person, or we may see ourselves as that we need to be seen better than what we are seen. Sometimes, tells a story, Avi tells the story, one of the characters in the book, tells the story of he's making a sandwich in the kitchen and he drops a piece of the ham on the floor and he just kicks the ham underneath the counter instead of bending over and picking it up. But he wants to be seen as somebody who is concerned about the cleanliness of the kitchen. He's just getting it out of sight. I mean, he could bend over and pick it up and put it where it's supposed to be, but see, he's in this situation that he probably feels that he's better than his wife, who's going to have to pick it up, or whoever else he's living with in the house. He's saying, I don't need to do that, but I want to be seen as somebody who's concerned. So see, we don't necessarily fit in just one box. We have a mixture of these boxes going on. And I'm sorry that this is so blurry. I don't know why it turned out this way. But when we elevate ourselves above other people, then we end up becoming impatient, indifferent, disdainful. Those are the emotions that we express. Some of us, my better than is, I'm too good to stand in line. I hate standing in line. I don't want to stand in line for anything. I'm impatient. And if we think we deserve better than what we're getting, then we feel entitled. Sometimes we feel mistreated. Sometimes we feel misunderstood. Now, are these the only emotions? No. These are sample emotions. There's probably a list that could go down to here on each one of these. These just happen to be 3 typical emotions associated with that particular. When our heart tells us that we're better than, then these are kind of the emotions that we express. That's how we can tell where we're at. These are indicators about what's going on. And if we see ourselves as less than, sometimes, this is an emotion that both genders deal with. We feel depressed, envious, maybe even needy when we don't see ourselves as enough. I like a story that Brene Brown tells the story of a mother and daughter parting ways at an airport, and the mother says to the daughter, "You are enough." That's a statement to the daughter that you're all you need to be. You don't need to feel better than anybody, but you don't need to ever feel worse than. You are who you are created to be. That's a different kind of a blessing, I think. But sometimes we feel worse than somebody else, and so we think, well, he's just better at that than I am. Well, maybe so. But what are you better at? What are you better at? And then the idea that we need to be seen as different than what we think we are seen is we get anxious and we get stressed and sometimes even overwhelmed. So again, this gives you a sampling of how, when our heart is at war, this is how we deal with other people. And this is how we feel about it. When our heart is at peace, then we interact and these boxes go away. Because see, we are betraying ourselves. We're not betraying the other, we're betraying ourselves. And then that gets us into this situation. The box. One of the things about the box is that it's not a totally enclosed box. Because I can be in the box in relationship A, if this is me, I'm A. I can be in the box to person B, but I can be out of the box to person C, or whatever these two are. I'm out of the box here. I have a great relationship with those three. I don't feel better than. I don't feel worse than. I don't feel like I get put down by them. I don't feel like that I deserve better. See, I'm out of the box with these. But when I have B over here, whenever we're interacting, I'm in the box. My heart's at war. I cannot see person B as somebody like me. I can see these three as somebody that's just like me. They have hurts, they have feelings, they have cares. They have to deal with teenagers just like I have to deal with teenagers. They have the struggles at work that I have to deal with. And so that's the box that we have to deal with. How do I get out of that box? One of the ways that the Arminger Institute recommends is based upon how our memories work. Some of us, I know this is going to be a problem because sometimes maybe our memory doesn't work, but generally our memory works better for finding good things. God gave us that grace that we have a tendency to remember good things better than bad things. One of the characters in the book tells the story. He's remembering. He's remembering. He's thinking about the box that he's in, and he's remembering a story about his father. His growing up. He grew up in, I think, Connecticut, in New England, and his father owned a farm fairly close to a stream or a river. As a matter of fact, they were right on the banks of a river. With their yard was right along the banks of the river, kind of sloping hillside down to the river banks. And his father had this farm, and it was they didn't have a lot. They only had the only vehicle they had was the old farm truck that they used to haul everything that they had associated with their farm. And the father and mother had saved and saved and saved, and they finally bought a new car. And of course, the young teenage, his name's Lou. Lou was all excited because now his parents had this new car, and he was of driving age, and so he asked his father if he could drive the car to town. So his father says, sure. Just need to do these errands and for us, and you can take the car to town. So Lou goes out and gets in the car, and gets in, starts the car, then remembers that he's left something in the house. So he jumps out of the car, runs in the house, gets what it, comes back out of the house, and the car's gone. The car's in the river. Now he has to go back in and tell his father. And he walks back in. He thinks maybe if I'm quiet, I can sneak back in and I don't have to talk to him. Dad is sitting in his chair reading the paper, and finally he says, "Do you need to talk to me?" And Lou finally says, "Well, yeah, I need to tell you that I forgot to set the parking brake and the car is in the river." And his father just didn't respond, just turned to the next page in the paper and said, "Well, I guess you'll have to take the truck to town." And he never was chastised by his father. So Lou realizes that his father had a heart of peace, even though this hard-earned car had ended up in the river. His father's heart of peace toward his son. He knew how badly his son was hurting. He knew his son. I could probably tell you several stories just like that about my father. He had a terrible temper, but it was never toward me or to my mother. He hated hay balers. But toward me, my father's had a heart of peace. I could tell him when I had failed. And he knew the pain that I was in. Just like Lou's father was that same way. So Lou recognized that in his life, there were people who had hearts of peace and what the impact of that was. And so the way we can get out of this box is by connecting in our lives, either through memories, or maybe it has to do with somebody who's in our life presently, that we recognize their heart of peace with us. We recognize that when we're in their presence, things are different. And so we get in touch with it. When we get in touch with that, when we begin to remember what that heart of peace looks like, then we can begin to get rid of the walls between us. Our heart of peace can overcome our heart of war. So, connecting, using our heart of peace with C or with these can help us build that relationship with B. We can get rid of the walls. In other words, getting in touch with our humanity. Getting in touch with each one of our humanities. Okay. Well, now that I'm about hoarse and I'm done, anything you want to talk about. Tell me about, any of you have some stories that you'd like to share associated with people who you know have a heart of peace toward you?
My husband.
Your husband? Okay. So the place that you can go and know that he accepts you fully, and even in difficult times. When we have the, I realize this is new and this is a fresh idea. So what I'm asking us, especially as a church, to begin the process of finding our hearts at peace with each other. Even with those of us that, I will say from the clergy standpoint, find your heart at peace with your pastor. Even when you disagree with the pastor. Begin to consider what the pastor has to go through to try to build and educate and minister to what it takes for them to be a part of your lives. But more importantly, to be having a heart at peace with the person you're sitting next to in the pew that you're worshiping with on Sunday morning. Yeah, you don't always sit with friends. You need to have a heart at peace with the person that was sitting in your pew during the summertime. The recommendations of the commission came out of the work. If you haven't seen the videos yet, there were 32 members of the commission. And they came from all over the world. They were many different nationalities, different ethnic groups, different sexualities, different areas of the country politically, different areas of the country regionally. It was a diverse group. And the comment that we hear in the video is that it was the most diverse group that most of them had ever been a part of. That's different because what has happened in our church in the last 50 years is people have used the collusion diagram that I had. We found allies for our position. And then we formed with our heart of war those positions against one another, and we've gone and we beat up each other verbally, if not physically. And that's different than this commission because there was not people trying to find allies. They were trying to understand one another. I don't remember it in the video, but one of the videos that I watched talks about positions Positions are non-negotiable. He tells a little parable in one of the video clips, modern parable of two people in a library. And they're both working on their projects. And one of them gets up and goes over and opens the window. And a few minutes later, the second man gets up, goes, closes the window. Then in a little bit, the first man goes over and he opens it halfway. And then second man goes over and what does he do?
Close it that way.
Actually, he closes it all the way. Positions are non-negotiable. His position is the window needs to be closed, and the one wants the position to be open. The librarian decides she's going to see what's going on here. And so she begins to talk. She talks to number one. He's working on, he's studying for an exam, and he's trying to process all this information, and it's getting stuffy in here, and he knows he has to work late, and if he needs fresh air, he doesn't want to fall asleep while he's trying to do his work. Second man says, well, I've got all these papers out here and I'm working on, and every time the window is open, the papers are just moving all over, and I get distracted and I can't do my work. Now, what is the librarian doing? Is she talking about the positions? No, she's talking about, she's down here in the process of reasons, information. Why? And then there's a bunch of other W questions, aren't there? So, she says, well, I can turn the air conditioning down. That'll please number one. If he still wants the fresh air, number two, let me find you another table that you can go and do your work. You see, there's solutions when you're dealing with the reasons and the information. You can find that. But it's hard to find compromise when one is open and the other is closed. But if you can locate some background, find some reason, then you can begin to find solutions or choices. Here you can develop choices, maybe even solutions. But it takes, this is that information, learning, listening. That's what has to happen here. So this is important, what I think is important stuff for us as the United Methodist Church, as St. Paul's United Methodist Church, as the Desert Southwest Annual Conference. Even if whatever decision the special conference makes, whatever decision they do, some of us aren't probably going to be happy. But we need to work together ourselves in this area. We need to get rid of our non-negotiable. I mean, we may have positions, but let's be willing to talk about how we got to these positions. Let's talk to one another about the information, the process. Because that's, if we can't learn to do that, regardless of what the outcome of our special conference is, we're not going to be any better off. I'm sorry, folks, we are in a period of change. And we have to change. He mentioned in the video Tibbetts. Help me out here. Well, okay. No, I'm sorry, not Tibbetts, Tickle. Phyllis Tickle. If I'd read my notes, I would know, huh? Phyllis Tickle wrote a book called The Great Emergence. It's a little bitty book. It's probably only about that big. Just a little bitty book. Probably get it used online. It's been out quite a number of years. But the point that she makes is that every 500 years, the church goes through a transition. And we're in that 500-year point. The first was, the first change had to do with Paul arguing that Gentiles needed to be a part of the church. Then there was a split between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Church. And then there's Reformation. And all of a sudden, we are 500 years downstream of the Reformation. It's a time of transition. It's a time of change. I mean, we live in a different world than the world was 500 years ago. We live in a different world than it was when I was born. I think of my dad was farming with horses when I was born. I got the scars to prove it. I got kicked in the head by one of them. Now you know what's wrong with me. I didn't have a TV in my house till I was a senior in high school. My telephone was a party line. It's the technology that we're dealing with, where we talk about Facebook. That makes our world a different place. You can say, well, it's bad. Well, no, it's good too. It's good, and yes, there's some bad parts associated with it, but guys, I have the daughter of some real close friends who I can communicate with who lives in England. If it wasn't for Facebook, I wouldn't see pictures of my grandkids who are scattered all over the United States. I might get a letter every year, but
I'm translating my dad's love letters to my mother. And when they were in the same town, his version of Facebook was get a letter in the mail by 8, and she'd get it in the second delivery at 4. All them ahead.
I found a postcard that my father wrote. My father was working on the Denver, Rio Grande, and Western Railroad, which went from Pueblo, Colorado, through the Royal Gorge to Provo, Utah. And my father worked with a team of guys who put in the telegraph wires line along the railroad track. And I found in my mom's papers a postcard from my father when they were dating. That was, I know that my father probably only wrote I don't know how long, he worked about, I think, 1.5 years or 2 years in that position, and so he probably wrote 5 letters at that point in time, but that was interesting. But, you know, we have solar power. We're beginning to use renewable resources. We know things about Mars. We know things about some of the planets of our solar system. We know things about our universe that we didn't even think of. So, you know, we can't continue to stand against the change, and so the biggest change has to occur in our own heart. That changing our heart of war to a heart of peace, especially about the issue of sexuality within the church. And we need to see people as God created them. And I would say that my position has changed over the years. I'm where maybe some of you were or are, and maybe I've gotten to where some of you have been for a long time. So we're called to change. We're called to be open. We're called to be prepared. One of the reasons that this is so important, the reason in my mind that it's so important, is that we've lost our way. We've been focused on this issue for 50 years, and it is detracted from what we ought to be doing. We ought to be loving our neighbors. We ought to be out there touching lives outside the church. We shouldn't be concerned about what's going on here. Our primary client is out there, off campus. Our primary client is across the street, down the way. And so that's where we need to be. There's people that need the love that this church has to offer. There's people that need the compassion that we have. And we need to get past this issue and move on to where God is calling us to be. And it's not just this church, but it's Iris was with us for 4 weeks when we were doing our last study. Iris come from Central Florida, and Iris has had to go back to wrestle with these issues within her church and her small rural church, and how they are seeing what's going on. So we're not alone in this, but we need to step out and be the church that God's created us to be. So, I'm done talking. I've said too much. I've talked too much. You've been very good at listening. But next week we will begin to look at the outcome of the commission. There's three ways that they are I hate to erase my important stuff here. There's the traditional one church. These are kind of the way they've known it, given them nomenclature. How do I spell church? And then there's connectional conferences. I think that's how they term that. Those are basically the three ways that the commission. There may be some others that are put in by the different caucuses, I hate the fact that the Judicial Council said the different caucuses could present, because I think it kind of undermines the effort, but in any case. So the traditional is doing the same stuff we've been doing, basically. Doesn't make any changes to the discipline, and it basically becomes a little more draconian in how it's more punitive than where we are now. The one church plan removes all of the argumentative statements within the book of discipline, and gives the authority to each annual conference and basically each church as to how they are going to deal with all the different sexuality issues. And so that takes the one church plan, brings more authority down to the church and the annual conference to choose how they want to be. And then the connectional conferences is really a complicated plan, because it's establishing, I think, a progressive conference and a traditional conference and some other conference, and then the churches and the annual conferences can choose to align themselves with one of these three conferences, and each of the conferences will basically have different disciplines, and so that's the connectional conferences. The plan that has the most support among the bishops and among the commission that put it together. It wasn't unanimous. Not all commission members are unanimous associated with this, but nobody on the commission is standing against it. So the one church plan is the plan that seems to have the most support. But that's, again, the special conference hasn't met, won't meet till next February, and so a lot can happen. But anyway, that's if you're reading that report, the final report is it's down here on your sheet, and it says just report where it says report. That's the link for the final report. There's the release announcement and so on and so forth. The problem with the release announcement is that there's commentary associated with it, but it doesn't really tell you what's in it. I have to say the report is 93 pages long. It's really that long because they have to go through each paragraph of if they're making changes to the discipline, which especially the last two positions, they have to go through the discipline and show what's changing within the discipline. So there's a lot of pages where they're looking at the different paragraphs and how the paragraphs will change. So that's a lot of the report is that. But in the short version is that in this middle one is where there's a lot of change. The traditional doesn't change much within the discipline.
May I ask you, then when we have a new book of discipline, if they decide on like doing the church, the second one?
We have basically after every general conference, the book of discipline is revised and reprinted. So every 4 years we get a new book of discipline. Sometimes not very much changes, sometimes a lot of things change. But to answer your question is yes, the discipline will
And
change.
it would cover all the Methodist church.
Well, again, that depends upon what happens if we're here, they'll actually publish 3 disciplines probably, or 2 disciplines, or there'll be more than 1 discipline in this particular connectional conferences. Here, if there's a one church plan, we'll all have the same discipline, but we are given, it won't be as restrictive. In other words, it will say, you as a local church can choose, if you do not want a gay pastor, then you have the right to do that. If the annual conference says we do not want to ordain gay men and women, they can do that. If our annual conference says we do want to ordain gay and lesbian people, we can do that. It just means that we have more flexibility, and we agree to move on in terms of our mission, and to move on in the love of Christ.
How does that resolve the Western jurisdiction problem we have with the bishop right now?
What problem? What problem do we have in the Western jurisdiction? She is bishop of the Rocky Mountain National Annual Conference. Yes. He's asking about, at the last jurisdictional conference, Bishop Karen Oliveto, who is a lesbian woman in a relationship, married to another woman. They've been in a relationship for 40 years. Karen has been a pastor in the United Methodist Church at very large churches. Her last appointment before becoming elected as a bishop was at a large downtown church in San Francisco. She's been highly effective as a pastor. She was elected at our last jurisdictional conference as a bishop, and was appointed to the Rocky Mountain Annual Conference. And at this time, I think you say it wasn't necessarily resolved, that there was some people who were going to make press charges associated with that, but because of the action of the General Conference to say we're going to address this, all of that was put on hold. And so, but for the most part, the church, the Rocky Mountain Annual Conference has accepted her as their bishop, and very happy. As far as I know, there may be some churches that are unhappy, but most of the people that I've talked to from that annual conference are very happy with their bishop. And
but it didn't go along with the discipline. That wasn't.
We didn't. That the discipline does not allow that, but
discipline. So it's sad that the discipline says something different than what was been.
And that started back in 1974, and with the statements. Last week we kind of went through the history, but there's been every 4 years this argument comes up at General Conference, and we wrestle with that issue, and a lot of things that need to get done don't get done at our General Conference.
I think that'd be an easy solution to that, though.
Well, that's what they're working on right now.
Well, and see, that's basically where this movement is. It's to say, you can't live with it, okay. But if you can, okay. In other words, we're not going to beat each other up over it. We're going to stop having trials over gay and lesbian issues. And so, you know, I'm in your court, but some aren't. That's why I think it's important for us to have this heart of peace that accepts and understands. So that's kind of the purpose of this. Then we'll get into the issues.
Yes, did they take a vote or get a consensus at our annual conference in Phoenix this year of those three, or they just learned about them?
We have, this report just came out at the end of July. July 30th is when the report was.
Is this a different one than, we heard about a 3-plan last spring at UMW?
There's been a lot of, what do I want to say, press releases and this is what we think is happening, this is thing, but
Oh, I was curious, okay.
it was not published for everybody until the end of July.
Because the South District led us to believe that these were the 3 plans
Well, I
that
think
we got last spring.
well,
Was it, yeah?
Is it different than that?
I think so, a little bit, yeah.
well,
Yeah, but I mean, this is not a complete thing.
the thing is, you didn't hear a lot from Tony or from our bishop or from other areas of the church because the work of the commission had not been completed, and so we didn't talk about things that we didn't know for certain that this is what we have to deal with. But now we know this is the report. This is what and again, we don't know how the people who go to the special general conference, the delegates or the members of the general conference, we don't know how they're going to, you know. I'm praying that they study this like we're studying it, that they go with a heart of peace so that they can actually talk to one another and understand each other and actually make a decision not based upon their position, but make a decision based upon what the Spirit of God says to them as they're working together. So
I was wondering, how are the delegates appointed, or who goes to this?
at our annual conference, delegates or members are elected. And so we have, based upon the size of the annual conferences, the population of the annual conferences determines the number of delegates that you get. And we basically get one clergy and one layperson from our annual conference because we're a small annual conference.
Okay.
But we also have 2 alternates, clergy, and 2 alternates for lay. So if something happened, then we have people that, and they kind of go as a delegation, but they are elected at the annual conference to go.
So they've
yes,
already been appointed to go.
they've already been elected. That was done this past annual conference.
And where are they from? Just out of curiosity.
Um,
Sir. I don't need to put you on the spot.
Well, some of them have served. One of the, trying to think who the layperson is. The layperson, I think, comes from Las Vegas, and the clergy person is serving in Prescott now. Has served in the South District. One of the alternates is on the conference staff. And they basically come from different parts of the annual conference.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
When it gets to the point of voting on these, can they be amended, or they will?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I'm just curious. 'Cause
Yes.
that could be interesting.
Yes. Yes. That they are. This is what's going to be presented to the general conference. Yes, amendments can be written. There can be other proposals submitted. And I mean, yes, it's a bit of a toss-up. My prayer is that at the 2016 General Conference, when basically the General Conference threw its hands up and said, we're tired of wrestling with this. Bishops, give us some leadership. And the bishops in 24 hours came back with a plan to develop this commission, to give them a charter to do. And they did that, and it's been done. And so I think for us, we would be like the Israelites in the desert with the golden calf if we devalue the work that the commission has done. That's my personal opinion. Yes.
I'd like to compliment you on the effort and the time you put into these classes, but tonight this is a never-ending discussion. I think we should dismiss.
Well, we're done. The clock has spoken. So, yeah. But bring them back. We're going to have 2 more nights to discuss. I will email again the list that I have sent out. So if you get tired of hearing it, I'm sorry, just put it in a trash can. But I encourage you to look at, I shouldn't say lots, there's quite a few interviews with the people on the commission. I think it's worthwhile hearing them, to hear their point of view as to, some of them came in and said, you know, we were here, but now we're together, we understand. We've changed. So both sides, they've moved. So
How many meetings are you gonna have? I'm not gonna be here, but I was wondering for everybody else.
we have 2 more on this. 2 more on this. For right now, we could address it later on. Depends upon you. If we want to have a discussion class later on, we can do that. Starting the 2nd Monday in September, we're going to start looking at the Book of Revelation. So,
If you have to miss one, George sends out an email where you can watch everything that happened at the meeting.
and I'm going to try. George is going to be gone for a couple of weeks, so I'm